Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
And I'm Joe Healy with DevilsDigest.com.
All right, Joe, the portal entry window has officially closed. That's done. It's dusted. Well, I guess except for the folks that just played in yesterday's national title game. They have 5 days to jump in. But for all intents and purposes, that window is closed. Now, that doesn't mean that the folks inside the portal already who haven't committed or signed, they have every ability to do so whenever. But it's still a pretty good time right now for folks to kind of catch their breath as ASU, as we documented over the last couple of weeks, kind of been on a whirlwind signing spree, bringing in 24 new names through the portal, kind of reset and take a deep dive at what the roster looks like right now.
Last week we talked about the word closure being an important word and a relevant word, and that's something I think that rings true also this week. College football season is over. The transfer portal window, as you talked about, with the exception of Indiana and Miami, is closed. So the entries that were made, and even some of those like trickling announcements in the couple days thereafter, I mean, that's to be expected. So the vast bulk, the 10 to 11,000 names that were ultimately entered at some point into the transfer portal, are there. So now it is time to kind of turn that page and look toward the future. And it's a unique thing to do at this point here in, kind of mid to late January. But since, as we've talked about numerous times, that transfer portal window that just closed is the only one. So we're not looking at, all right, who's ASU going to add as the last remaining pieces in the spring and summertime after spring ball? That's not the case this year. So, yeah, we can pretty much conclusively, maybe with the, some rare exceptions, talk about what this 2026 roster is going to look like for ASU.
Yeah, as it currently stands, and if the count is accurate, 102 of ASU's 105 roster spots in this post-house settlement world have been filled. And of course, the traditional signing day coming up in the first week of February, that still looms. So ASU has some room there. But of course, as you mentioned, the portal still open for those folks who jumped in. So it does have a couple spots, but yeah, as you mentioned, Joe, for all intents and purposes, pretty much ASU is done, has really addressed some of the key positions, and to what degree of success we'll ultimately find out. But we'll break that all down. Now we should start off with talking about at least on a broader terms before we get into more deeper positional analysis. ASU's final two signees to this point, both cornerbacks. They signed Chance Rucker from Michigan State, who has 2 years left, 6'1", 180-pounder, who had 9 starts in 2023, appeared in 23 games for the Spartans over his couple seasons there. Was injured for most of 2024, a reserve last year. And then another power 4 corner coming over, Nigel Pringle from Arkansas, 3 years left, 6'2", 177-pounder from Texas. I should say both Rucker and Pringle are Texans. Appeared in 8 games with 2 tackles. So adding some, continuing to add a lot of length to that defensive back room.
Yeah, and so they've really bulked up at cornerback. Of course, as we know, the ASU loses those 2 starters, or certainly 2 of the top 3 cornerbacks, and then some depth guys as well. Some that through graduation, some through the transfer portal. So these additions are very, very important, even if they're guys that might be a little bit further down the depth chart. Maybe battling for a 2-deep position instead of really battling for a starting position. But they've got FBS power conference experience. In the case of Rucker, you probably have some familiarity with the coaching staff here, at least with Reynolds. So again, these are additions that needed to be made because there's a lot of good quarterback play in the Big 12, though a lot of those good quarterbacks are choosing to exit to schools outside the Big 12. But you still got to be ready for some potent offenses.
All right, so one other non-football note before we dive into our roster analysis. Head baseball coach Willie Bloomquist got a 2-year extension. Of course, baseball season, Joe, is right around the corner. I know you're keenly aware. And of course, we'll be bringing all kinds of preview coverage on this year's squad. But, coming off of a tournament appearance, what are your thoughts on the 2-year extension for Willie?
Yeah, we are getting close. Under a month, the baseball gets started on Valentine's Day weekend, just in a handful of weeks. I think it's something that obviously puts some continuity and puts things on solid ground for the program, as we've talked about in the past. A lot of resources being put into the program, whether that's scholarship increases or facilities, things like that. Conversations that we had several months ago. We're kind of at the forefront where those are things that are becoming more important now with baseball season arriving. Now, obviously, ASU took a step in a positive direction last year by making it into a regional. and so a lot of folks were still looking at this season as a need to win year. It just doesn't seem like it's necessarily going to be as significant as like win or go home, as is kind of the case with men's basketball. So again, Bloomquist is the human being that you want to resurrect this program. It is a work in progress for sure, and has been for a few years. But he is, again, the human being that you want to be able to be successful here, and hopefully the continuity with the contract extension and the other resources, plus the work that ASU did in the transfer portal this past offseason. There's quite a bit of hype of ASU being looked at, especially from the offensive perspective, maybe not missing too much of a beat from what it lost last year. And obviously we'll go into this in much greater detail in the coming weeks as we preview the baseball season. But Bloomquist was one of those guys that I just really wanted to work out for him at Arizona State, and having that contract extension that just helps for recruiting in a number of different purposes.
All right, let's dive into the current state of this Sun Devil football roster, kind of post portal ish, and of course with that caveat that there is a few spots in which they can maneuver in the coming days, weeks, and months. Now, taking a broad look at the transfer portal haul, we mentioned 24 total signings. Just kind of a positional breakdown: 4 cornerbacks, 3 receivers, 3 safeties, 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 linebackers, 2 tight ends, 2 defensive ends, a center, an offensive tackle, a punter, kicker, and long snapper. So let's start off, of course, at the quarterback position. And right now, that room is 4 deep. Returning, you have redshirt freshman Cam Dyer, who ended the year as the QB2 behind Jeff Sims. Unfortunately, kind of the game flow, the back and forth nature, didn't get to quite make his debut in the Sun Bowl, but a promising young player in his own right. But of course, 3 newcomers are added to this program, with Jeff Sims and Sam Levitt moving on to other pastures. True freshman Jake Fetty, the 4-star signee out of El Paso, got a lot of folks excited there. And then the transfer portal additions: redshirt sophomore Cutter Boley coming over from Kentucky, senior Mikey Keene coming over from Michigan, who previously had time at UCF and Fresno State. His Fresno State then included a road win at Arizona State in 2023. Now, when you look at this group, you got some intriguing young talent and Fetty and Dyer. You got a wily veteran in Mikey Keene, also a local product as well. But I think, all eyes, Joe, clearly are going to be on what was ASU's first transfer portal signee, guy who got, a good deal to come here and a high upside in Cutter Boley.
Yeah, I think as you break that down, there are basically some, to me at least, pretty obvious tiers of how this could work out. It just seems very likely that Boley is, the targeted new QB1. And then you keep a guy like Mikey Keene there in that Jeff Sims type of role, that, highly experienced veteran quarterback as, likely your QB2, but as we've seen, that could still put you into action and even starting action for Arizona State. And if Boley comes out, and if the turnover issues, are a major problem for him as he prepares for the fall, I mean, that's probably the best way to work your way out of a job. Now, I'm not, trying to take a negative stance and say that that's going to be the case. It's just a conversation topic that we know from his past, is that there have been, an excess of turnovers, and that's something that's a sore spot for Sun Devil fans right now. So I think that those, top 2 will probably be competing for those top 2 spots. It just seems like Cam Dyer is probably a good third quarterback at this case, and maybe you find some packages for him. And then ideally, you redshirt Jake Fetty, maybe get him some action throughout the course of the year, but all intents and purposes, the number 4 QB. Again, we'll break this down in greater detail many times over the coming months, but at least, now that the dust has settled on the transfer portal, I think ASU did a fine job in terms of, finding guys to fit the right roles at this position group.
Yeah, it is interesting coming in that you're going to have just one guy coming in with familiarity with that offense, and Cam Dyer, who, of course, spent his true freshman season coming back off that torn ACL, suffered late in his high school career, but by the end of the season looked really good. A true dual threat guy, throws a nice ball. Jake Fetty is also pretty mobile in his own right, but those are some guys, along with that 2027 4-star commit in Weston Nielsen, that perhaps are not looking to contribute right away in 2026. So yeah, you're looking at a spring competition, Boley versus Keene, but yeah, kind of presumptively, kind of looks like with how fast they acted with Boley, that he's going to be the guy that's 6'5", kind of prototypical gunslinger frame. And if you missed our last episode where we were joined by Cole Topham, really providing a great X's and O's film breakdown of Boley's game, including all the strengths and some of the weaknesses, including those turnover issues. I really recommend that you check that out. Some great stuff there. And then, but yeah, having that veteran backup is such a luxury, I think, across college football with the new age where the talent is just really kind of more spread out than it's ever been. So having a guy like Keen, who's a veteran in that capacity, that could perhaps push Boley, but also be a good mentor for some of those younger guys in that room, I think is a nice bonus for Dillingham and Arroyo. And as we move on now to running back, right now you have four guys slated to return. Of course, senior Kyson Brown coming off a year really ravaged by injury. Sophomore Jason Brown, then sophomore Demarius Man Robinson, each of whom got the extensive run in the Sun Bowl, each topped 100 yards from scrimmage. Redshirt freshman Grayson Rigdon rounds out that quartet. Now, there are a trio of intriguing newcomers. Four-star true freshman Carde Mack, who got some run practicing with the squad near the end of the season during the bowl prep. A guy that has a tremendous amount of upside. And then two FCS signings that I think we're both pretty intrigued by, Joe. Junior David Avitz coming over from Villanova, and senior Marquise Gillis is making the move over from Delaware State, where he led the MEAC in rushing a season ago. So you have it's kind of weird to think of Kyson Brown already being kind of that wily veteran. Just seems like he got here yesterday, but you have some young talent there that really kind of flashed their potential in the bowl, kind of maybe setting themselves up for a good spring. But then a trio of very talented newcomers that could make a run. And Sean Aguano has a tremendous eye for talent, so if he's bringing these guys in, he has some expectations for him.
Yeah, talked about a quarterback, how on the surface it seems like there is a pretty clear pecking order, or at least we can kind of get our way to that finish line with relative ease. At running back, I think it's a lot more difficult. I mean, there's so many different ways that this could play out. Obviously, Kyson Brown being the elder statesman, being the guy who should have been the top running back had he been healthy. Logic tells you that he would be the guy to take on that role. But then again, we've heard reports and seen things about a guy like Gillis, who's slated as like, hey, don't sleep on him being the possible starting running back. Okay, and then what about guys like Man Robinson and Jason Brown, who Robinson got a good amount of time last year, and Brown got some time here and there, but looked real solid in the bowl game, as did Robinson too. Where did those youngsters fit in? Where's a guy like Abbott fit in? Carde Mack, it just makes sense that he's probably aiming toward a red shirt. I'm pleasantly surprised that none of those youngsters hit the transfer portal, especially after ASU got a couple of those FCS transfers. I was just really wondering if someone like a Robinson or a Jason Brown, maybe even a Grayson Rigdon, like at least one of those three, I figured would enter the portal. Again, I'm not blaming them for not doing it. Not mad that they didn't do it, but it's quite a list there. So this is a really unique group with its depth. Obviously, it offers a lot to this offense, but it's very different. At least it feels. I mean, gosh, I think back to it feels like a blip on the radar or a time that really never existed, or some weird fever dream. But like that 2020, 2021 running back group that they had with Rashad White and Chip Trainum and Daniel Nagata and that sort of thing. I mean, that seemed like a loaded group of a lot of guys. I mean, this is like double that. So the biggest question mark is just how it adds up, how it sorts out. I mean, we've been talking about it many times for several years of, like the old topic, is this going to be the year of the tight end? Okay. Is this going to be the year of not, one heavy dose of one running back in a true platoon? I mean, ASU has had tremendous success running the ball in the last several years, so I'm not going to question that approach of having one primary guy, but this lineup just gives you the impression that they're going to use a lot of different looks, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because there were some times last year where ASU was able to run the ball great with a guy like Raleek Brown. I mean, he would torch some teams but get limited by others. So if you have this sort of depth, then that helps you kind of adjust on the fly. If one guy's maybe not having a great day, you can plug somebody else in.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if this is a year where we get the more guys involved, because it seems like each and every year there is quality depth. I know that we were talking all season long with Raleek Brown, Kyson Brown, and then Kanye Udo coming in, coming off 1,000-yard year. This is a deep running back group, and ultimately it was Raleek Brown coming and shouldering the load. And it seems like every year under Sean Aguano, one guy ultimately takes the reign, but you have seven, backs here, and some veterans. some guys who have really done things at the the Division 1 level, and some guys that have really some high upsides that we'll see, and we'll break down, of course, exactly how this spring battle transpires. But you got to figure, the early edge probably goes with some of these guys that are coming back that are familiar with the offensive scheme from Dillingham and Arroyo. But man, some of the production, some of the film, with Marquise Gillis, David Avid, and then Carde Mack, what he was able to do in high school, and just seeing him for a couple practices during the bowl session. Man, he has that Demario Richard like build, and that could be maybe he's not here 26 bell cow, but some big days could be ahead. So it'll be really interesting, and another year where you have good depth, and you have, as I know are, you believe this, Joe, and I think I share this opinion as well. I mean, you got probably the best running backs coach in the country, and the one whose resume through his first 7-8 years here is pretty unimpeachable. So with this stable of backs, you figure some good things are going to be coming.
Yeah, and another thing that I'm sure we agree on, and this actually kind of blows my mind quite legitimately with these, different roster things and all that. You're kind of taking more players than you may typically do. I don't see why in the world Arizona State and every school on the roster, you got 105 roster spots. Give one to a fullback, just one. I mean, it's a very smart thing to do, and it pays off. Just find one dude who just likes lifting weights and drinking protein shakes and maybe lugging a car on his back like a dude that we like to talk about from about 20 years ago. Just get some psychopath like that and get him on your roster every year, and I'm confident, almost certain that the results will be there. I think just give one roster spot to that kind of guy, and I'm guarantee it will pay off.
Yeah, we might have to get an NIL fund just to do that, do a roster spot just for that, because if you can Stanford names all their the head coach is the whatever family director of football operations or something. We should have the Speak of the Devils fullback position. I mean, because you have some dudes who I think could do it, but I mean it's been a while since the guy the psychopaths that you mentioned, like Case Hatch, who had a chain full of the broken face masks from those collisions, those badges of honor. I mean, that's football. That's what we need to bring that back.
Yeah, we saw James Giggy a little bit out there in that H-back, fullback type of role, and we've seen offensive linemen. I think Makua Pule the year before last, before he's playing as much offensive line as he did this year. So they're kind of using a role. It's got to be out there again. Like a guy like Hatch, go find some dude who played linebacker or defensive end and just maybe a step slow or whatever for that position, and just put him out there and say, you know what, your college will be paid for, and you'll get some extra change in your pocket if you just go out there and hit the guy in front of you. And even though it's kind of an old school mentality, the guys like the Mike Carneys and the Jeff Polks of the world, there's still got to be some guys that like to do that dirty work. So I'm largely soliciting for that to be the case. And I think for all the deep red zone woes that we saw, short yardage stuff, I mean, if you got a guy like that lining up, not to hijack this entire show, but I feel like ASU, if they lined that up last year, there are a couple games that ended up with losses that would have been wins if you employed that, in my opinion.
All right, let's make this happen. This is the offseason goal. Bring ASU back to the Big 12 title game. All right, moving on to wide receiver. Right now, there are slated to be 12 wide receivers coming into the 2026 season, 9 of which are returners, led by senior Jalen Moss, who finally, when healthy, got to show a little bit of his potential in the Sun Bowl. You got a couple of juniors and Derek Eusebio and Jaron Hamilton. Sophomore Plaz Johnson, who came in as a corner, but of course was a dynamic receiver in high school at Chaparral. He unfortunately tore his ACL, but he will be playing on the offensive side of the ball in 2026. And then you have 5 redshirt freshmen. Unfortunately, it looks like, Harry Hassman will be injured and not participate in the year. But you have Corey Butler, Uriah Nellums, Chance Abels, and converted quarterback Michael Butter Tollefson, who looks like he'll be making that move over to the receiver position, slot receiver specifically. But then, Joe, the trio of newcomers are really kind of the headliners. We've talked about them a lot in the last couple of weeks. Senior Omarion Miller, junior Reed Harris, 2 of the highest rated players in the transfer portal overall, let alone at the receiver position. They're both coming in, presumed starters right off the bat, probably. And then sophomore Raiden Vines Bright, who, of course, is a local kid, played his first 3 years of high school ball there, had a pretty nice true freshman season for Washington.
Yeah, obviously those pickups are huge, especially the first two. We've talked about it, quite a few times in the last few weeks. For Miller, that's someone that, again, that could be a first, maybe second day NFL pick a year from now. Someone just with a ridiculously high upside, as is the case with Reed Harris. I mean, someone that's got the size and the athleticism. I mean, those two, as you mentioned, pretty much just you don't have to use pencil. You can etch it in stone, quite literally, that those guys will be starters. Okay, how do they put the supporting cast together around them in the starting lineup? Is Vines Bright going to be someone that can jump right into the starting lineup? Obviously, Jalen Moss is the guy that you'll probably look at as someone that's probably going to be that third receiver, especially if he can build on the performance that he had in the Sun Bowl and just kind of get back that swagger that he had from his time at Fresno State, because those numbers were quite good. Obviously, you're not going to limit a guy like Derek Eusebio and assume he's not going to rise to the occasion, because that's basically what he's done since he's come to Arizona State. So I think you kind of have, I mean, they may play like different positions, and then Jaron Hamilton being a wild card, just that breakout game against Texas Tech, pretty quiet around there, but someone that showed flashes of downfield ability. So I think they really hit a home run. I mean, all things considered, I can't imagine there are too many teams in the country that did better in the transfer portal at wide receiver than ASU. So it's very encouraging that we're talking about guys like Moss, Hamilton, Eusebio, and some of those youngsters from the redshirt freshmen to be in 2026. Looking at those as like you're rounding out the starting lineup and your second and third team, as opposed to having to create your entire starting lineup from this list. And that's no disrespect to them, but we just know how the wide receiver position was last year, that it was really inconsistent from top to bottom in terms of finding somebody other than Jordan Tyson. So to get these big dogs from the transfer portal, that helps tremendously, especially when you're ushering in a new quarterback.
Yeah, it's going to be real fun to see the new group of guys, and especially with a new quarterback and a couple new quarterbacks in that mix. See how that rapport and that chemistry in spring ball really develops. And we saw once Jordan Tyson was able to get healthy after his first season in Tempe, it took a little bit of time, but by the end of that first spring, he and Sam Levitt started to flash that vast potential that would go on to set the Big 12 on fire in 2024. So we could see something similar, in a few months when spring ball opens. Some new faces at the tight end position, but also a trio of returners for this group that has 7 players in total. The elder statesman in that room, senior Kamari Anderson, who relatively quiet first year in Tempe, that have as I think the season got on and he became more comfortable in the offense, became a bigger threat. A couple of sophomores, James Giggy, and then probably one of the more intriguing, highest upside players on this entire roster, AJ Ia, is returning. And then there's 4 new tight ends that are going to be joining Jason Mond's group. A couple of transfer portal additions. Anthony Miller is coming over from Tulane. He perhaps projects more as a kind of that inline blocker guy, big 6'5", 250, 260-pound frame. Junior Christian Ingman coming over from another FCS program in Portland State, a guy who posted one of the nation's best yards per catch averages for tight ends at the FCS level. And then a pair of very talented and intriguing true freshmen, Hayden Vircher and Landon Myrie.
Yeah, and so with this group, really looking at AJ Ia and Kamari Anderson to be near the top of that like breakout watch list for ASU, because you kind of get the impression, though as you mentioned, ASU grabbed 4 tight ends between high school recruiting and the transfer portal. You don't necessarily get the impression that any of those 4 is someone that's going to be inserted into that top position to replace Shimon Mateer. You feel like AJ Ia, Kamari Anderson are still guys that are really going to be at the top of the depth chart. Guys like Ingman, Miller, they can be contributors for sure. But you just looking at the resume, a guy like Shimon Mateer, when he came here, I mean, he had been productive at Cincinnati, so he's done it at the FBS level, done it at the power conference level. So that's kind of a transition from being a starter elsewhere to a starter here. Again, Ia and Kamari Anderson are guys that I think have a world of opportunity to break out this year. I think ASU would benefit greatly from them breaking out. I kind of wish AJ Ia would have been, limited to those 4 fewer games so that he could have redshirted this past season, because, obviously the offensive contributions were minimal, but maybe that game experience will prove to be important. So Again, really counting on those guys as the pendulum swings, and you need not only a new starter, but Cam Harple. He was improved. He had a solid season. He was a guy that was on the field a lot. So you're replacing him as well. So they're going to have a lot of guys to sort this out through. It's a position group where that they use. So whoever's that top guy, I mean, I know that you got a new quarterback in there, but it seemed logical that ASU's starting tight end, should be in that 30 plus catch range per year, or at least divided among the group. So there are touches to be had. It's a different conversation than a handful of years ago, where we weren't sure if the whole position group would get 10 receptions on the year. So again, this is one where you're really looking at those top two guys, those top two returners, to really emerge as key players for this offense.
Yeah, you look at last year, and with the early season injuries to Jalen Moss, you saw a lot more 12 personnel packages being used with those two tight ends, and so it'll be interesting to see exactly if ASU again leads into a lot of those multiple 12 and 13 personnel packages that we saw throughout the course of the season, or perhaps they open things up a little bit more. But looks like they'll have some talented options, whatever road they take. Moving on to the offensive line. This, of course, is one of the, or I think the biggest in terms of numbers, position groups on the team. Now, coming back, running down in terms of the eligibility, you got a couple of seniors, and Douglas Taloma, who was a JUCO transfer, Jalen Clem, who started in the bowl game. Of course, making his return last year after missing the prior year due to a serious medical issue. Junior Makua Pule, who had some valiant efforts and made a start at Texas Tech, and has become a valuable plug and play versatile piece along that offensive line. A couple of the now run to the sophomore eligibilities. You got Wade Helton, who was the starting center throughout after the unfortunate injury to Ben Coleman, so he could be certainly somebody in that mix. Then Mekhi Stewart, who as a true freshman ultimately kind of ended the year as a starter at that left guard. Some freshman moments, but a world of upside for Stewart. And then redshirt sophomore champ Wes Brooks played pretty well in the bowl game at right tackle. He's a guy that's been really improving and bulking up over the course of his time in Tempe. Terrell Kim, Brent Helton, and Xander Rujaroli round out the sophomores. And then you have four redshirt freshmen that, of course, a position like offensive line, you don't really want to see a guy play as a true freshman. So, of course, the red shirts are frequent there. Rob Lapuaho, Deshaun Bryant, Manu Maua Muti, and Matai Jefferson round out the returners. Now, the newcomers, Joe, of course, are some big names there. And you're starting off with senior Luke Bakalenko from Oklahoma, of course, was a starter at Stanford during a couple of years prior. A trio of juniors, this from Tana Tuapaola from Georgia Tech, and then a couple of top 10 national junior college offensive linemen. Jermaine Marshall, the 6'8" guy, one-time Georgia commit. He figures to be immediately in that mix at left tackle. And then Siosea Lapuaho, another junior college transfer as well. And then three freshmen that are coming in as part of that 2026 signing class. Marcus Uini, Cortavius Tissipe, and Naniva Nicholson.
Yeah, a lot of names, a lot of bodies.
A lot of names.
Now, obviously, starting at offensive tackle, you lose both your starters in Atkins and Ihanachor. So you're starting over there. Kind of seems like logic is telling you that maybe a group of like 5 guys will probably be in contention for those 2 spots. You've got those 2 returning players, that you mentioned in Clem and Westbrooks, ones who got some real vital game action in the bowl game. But then you've also got those 2 JUCO All-Americans, those highly rated junior college transfers. I believe they both project as offensive tackles. Those are options as well. And then, you talk about Bakalenko coming in as a transfer with a lot of experience at offensive tackle. So, that could be the main competitors there. We've seen in recent years how ASU, even in game situations, will use, multiple tackles. And we've thrown out the name Emmett Boley a lot, a guy that just played that reserve role and spot duty when necessary. As far as the interior of the line is concerned, really going to keep an eye on just the progress of guys who got some good action this year. As far as Pule is concerned, Mekhi Stewart, Helton, and then, when you're bringing over a transfer with some starting experience like Alu Tupuola, like that's, if you're getting a center like that, I think that's for a reason. So he just seems like the odds-on favorite to probably be the guy there, if I had to guess, and then shuffle some other pieces in the offensive line, on the interior as well. So there is, a good solid bit of overhaul for sure. That starting line from that college football playoff season is pretty much all gone from the program. So they are starting over a bit, but through the JUCO transfers and the transfer portal, it's going to be really interesting. It's kind of an aside. It's going to be really interesting to see, ASU leaned into the JUCO transfers across the board more than it has in a few years. So it's kind of like a subtle key to the season. I think how these junior college transfers on both sides of the line perform is something to keep an eye on, and its impact that it has on the season as a whole.
Yeah, it's going to be wild that your week one starters from this past season are all gone from the program, but you have other guys that are coming in with multiple starts under their belt over the course of the season, or who made a start or been with the program for a while, and in the two deep guys like Clem and Westbrooks as well. It's going to be a really interesting battle, and then at all the spots, and the Saga Haley's got his work cut out for him terms of developing these guys and getting them ready. But with so many other new faces along the offensive side of the ball, it's going to be very active and notable spring. Switching over to the defensive line, Joe, there are 19 D linemen, of course, headlined by the returners and a big, huge boost. This is probably a face of the program type guy heading into 26 in senior CJ Fight, really kind of anchoring that defensive tackle spot. That's huge for the interior of this defense. Of course, losing the top four guys on the edges. He'll be joined in terms of the inside, Blazin Lona Wong and Zach Swanson. As those veteran guys. Swanson, of course, missing most of the year with a foot injury, but he should be back. Senior Roman Petrie, it's kind of wild. Kind of like Kyson Brown. He just still seems like a young player, but has been flashing that potential, working behind some of those veterans for a couple of years now. I think that he has an opportunity now. You have a trio of juniors, Rashad McKenzie and Michael Gardner, were transfer additions. McKenzie from Wazoo, Gardner from Oregon, both really limited and did not factor in due to injury last year. Another junior college edge, Joshua Shanklin. A trio of sophomores that I know ASU staff is really high on. Ramar Williams is the name I think that folks should look out for at defensive tackle, being in that two deep and a contributor. They're really high on him. Albert Smith is continuing to bulk up. He has some rare explosiveness and bend off the edge. Celeste Manu as well, rounded out on the returners by redshirt freshman defensive tackle Deshaun Morgan. Moving to the newcomers, we talked about him last week, and it was, of course, losing your top four edges. ASU had a need from pass rushers and got a couple of P4 starters. Jalen Thompson coming over from Michigan State, Marion Winston from Baylor. Then Jeffrey Mans was a JC transfer, as well as Kirtland Vakalahi. Those are both junior eligibility guys. Hiram Veono is a redshirt freshman, junior college transfer, and then a trio of 2026 true freshmen and Landon Anderson, Julian Hugo, and Sidney Tenge. Hugo was a four-star guy who could potentially, maybe sneak in and get some early playing time.
So the defensive line as a whole is definitely going to be my most concerning overall. If we're lumping them all together, my most concerned, the position group that has me the most concerned for 2026. And the primary reason for that, number one, obviously there are a lot of departures, and on paper, and I'll repeat, on paper, I don't feel like the team has properly replaced those departures. And so ASU is going to be counting on some returning players who've had very limited action to step up into key roles. They're going to likely be counting on, some junior college players to step up and grow and learn on the fly. Guys like Thompson and Winston, those transfer defensive ends, you're going to be counting on them to improve. They've played quite a bit, or at least spent multiple years at the FBS and Power Conference levels, and their numbers most recently from 2025 were good, not great, but good. But you would want them to improve upon that to feel really comfortable with where you are in the defensive end position, especially not knowing what the depth's going to look like, because you were able to, on the edges, you were able to rotate those multiple guys and have pretty high level of performance. Even though we've expressed some, I don't know if frustration is the right word, but a guy like a Clayton Smith who was a solid player, but just never really broke through that plateau of being like an 8 to 10 sack guy that's high on the all conference list. Prince Dorba, you can kind of lump in that same conversation, but a guy like Justin Watley, probably overachieved. And Elijah O'Neal was a real solid player as well. On the interior, you're losing Jacob Kungaika. You get CJ Fight back. So, again, you need some of these transfers to hit and to improve and to be able to hit the ground running. They've got a lot of bodies out there, and if they can stay healthy and if you can get some development from those guys like the Shanklins and the McKenzies, and I know Mike Gardner is different because he was injured, but those are all guys that came to ASU last year and just weren't contributors this year for varying reasons, and that's okay. Sometimes guys come to the program and they're more developmental pieces that aren't meant to be instant contributors. Whatever the combination is, it's just really going to have to work, because if there are deficiencies on the defensive line, I mean, that's going to cause a number of issues if teams can run and throw freely on ASU.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to just the interior, just at least heading into spring ball, looks pretty stacked. When you have Fight, Blazing Lona Wong, Zach Swanson, those guys that it really, even Ramar Williams, and they're guys who are coming in with multiple years of experience in this defensive scheme. And that's one point that I harp on is that you see with this Brian Ward defense that guys can come in and contribute right away, but it's that second year, as he says, when they understand the why of the defense, that guys really level up. You saw the examples all over the the lineup and all three levels of the defense, whether it's your defensive ends, your linebackers, and Jordan Crook, Keyshawn Elliott last year. Just when you get that second year, things really seem to unlock, and now you're having so many guys in those defensive end areas that are coming in as newcomers that are probably going to be leaned on right away. Jalen Thompson and Marion Winston, 1 year guys. So they won't have the opportunity for a second year in the system. So hopefully they'll be able to hit the ground running. Of course, Thompson has that familiarity being, having been at Michigan State and coached by Dyron Reynolds back when Reynolds was the line coach for the Spartans. Moving over to linebacker, Joe, 10 players in this group for AJ Cooper. 6 are returners, headlined by Cyrus Fiaseu, who got the medical red shirt waiver, so he's going to be back. He will be joined by Martell Hughes, a guy that I know we're both pretty high on. And again, kind of just you blink and all of a sudden they're an upperclassman. Still seems like a young guy there. Prairie Young Black Goat is a sophomore who walked on initially a couple years ago. Intriguing prospect from up north in the state of Arizona. 3 redshirt freshmen, Puka Fuamaono, Isaiah Iosefa, and Tristan Bacon. And then 4 newcomers, headlined by Owen Long, who led FBS in tackles at Colorado State a year ago. He's significant signing, as we talked about a couple weeks ago when he pledged to the Sun Devils. Ramir Davis is coming down from NAU. He's a sophomore. And then 2 true freshmen, Mason Martin, another tackle machine from Missouri, and Oscar Aguiar.
Yeah, and really like how this position group is shaken out. I said it before, say it again. I feel like the coaching staff went above and beyond with what it did in the transfer portal at linebacker. I feel like you can have some quite a bit of confidence in the fact that that top trio likely be Owen Long, and then also Cyrus Fiaseu, Martell Hughes makes sense. It's kind of like the 3 main guys, kind of like how in recent years it's been. Keyshawn Elliott, Jordan Crook, and Fiaseu kind of being the top guys, though Hughes got a lot of action as well, especially when Fiaseu went down to injury. So we know that this staff will use quite a few linebackers. So you feel happy at that top end so that you can have some of those youngsters, whether it's a guy like Ramir Davis, who, he can get in the backfield. He's not the biggest dude, even for the linebacker position, but he can get in the backfield. So even if he has kind of a specialty that he works with, that can be a valuable thing. And then you got some of these youngsters that you can, sprinkle into competition as well. Again, so you're not necessarily elevating a guy before his time and having people out there where the game is just moving too fast for them. So, the acquisition of Long, I think for me is one of my absolute favorite of this entire portal cycle for ASU. So though it's really difficult to replace Keyshawn Elliott and Jordan Crook, both individually and especially collectively, for what they did this past year, I feel like the drop off isn't going to be, too bad. I think it might be maybe reminiscent of like the 2024 linebackers, where you got guys at different spots that are contributing. But again, a position group that on the surface prior to the transfer portal it was one where you're like, okay, like I feel all right about it, but you're losing those real star players. So the moves that they made make you feel a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what the some of the young guys, the true freshmen and Martin Aguiar, both guys that are just really just kind of those heat-seeking missiles, just make a ton of tackles, just kind of game in, game out, double-digit tackle type of guys. Isaiah Iosefa is a returner that a youngster that I believe is coming off an injury, but I think should be a guy that maybe factors in a little bit. We'll see how well that recovery goes, and then how he comes in, because I know the staff is really particularly high on him. But AJ Cooper, year in year out, continues to make the Werewolves a pretty potent group. Moving on to cornerback, Joe, and this is one area that had significant turnover. In fact, by my count, only two returners from a season ago, but two quality ones in that right. Sophomore Rodney Bimage, who I think has the makings and could be the next kind of ascendant Keith Abney type of star with his physicality, of course. Unfortunate end of the year with that injury, but should be good to go coming up. Nothing long term, and then redshirt freshman Joseph Smith out of the Houston area. Another guy who is really impressed this staff, looked good during practices, got to start in the bowl game against Duke, but really through the transfer portal is where this position has been overhauled. Now, ASU is bringing in a pair of guys that were starters and has starting experience at the Power 4 level. Junior Ashton Stamps is coming over from LSU, who a couple of years ago, I believe, was among the SEC leaders in passes defended. Chance Rucker, as you mentioned off the top of the show, another long corner from Michigan State who started a few years ago. Then a pair of redshirt freshmen, Caleb Chester coming over from Texas, Nigel Pringle from Arkansas as well. And then two guys coming in from the 2026 high school signing class, Taquan Dunn and Jalen Williams, both guys who have particularly high upside.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of turnover, but the staff did its job in this regard, and we'll see how dearly we miss that Keith Abney. As we talked about time and time again, someone who's played the position as well as anybody I've ever seen at ASU play cornerback. So it kind of makes sense logically. Bimage and maybe Stamps just kind of be the odds-on favorites to start, especially if Stamps can come anything close to what he did 2 years ago. But that's by no means a guarantee. I mean, you've got guys with power conference experience, whether that's game experience, starting experience, or just being on the teams. So these are, qualified football players. I think there's just going to be a ton of competition. And even a returner like Joseph Smith is someone that, not just going to give his spot up or the possibility of a spot up. So spring's probably going to be nasty there because you got a lot of guys that are kind of in similar positions, not necessarily one where you can look at and say, all right, well, that guy is clearly ahead of him, so we'll put him to the side. You've got 3, 4, 5 guys that are, again, in real similar spots. There are quite a few combinations on how this could shake out.
Plus, of course, with that nickel spot, being open, and that could be a situation where as we talked about, so many of these corners that are being brought in, big physical guys, 6 foot and over. So perhaps, if they're not, necessarily in the, your top 2 starting corner pair, maybe these guys have that physicality and ability to play nickel. That's a pretty demanding position as we've seen over the last couple of years. Done so well by Shamari Simmons a season or for a couple of years, and then last year, mainly with Kendrick Breedlove. Moving on to safety. Now, this is a group of 11, and that includes 6 returners led by junior Montana Warren, another like Blinken. They get old so fast. Boogie Wilson, who really impressed, I thought, in filling in for Xavier Alford, and of course, and unfortunately missed kind of the last bit of the season due to injury. Kyan McDonald, who has extensive experience at nickel as well. Sophomore Maurice Williams Jr., and then 2 redshirt freshmen, Xavier Scalron and Ben Alafeo Lilly. But then is really just, I think the really excitement is coming at the what they did in the transfer portal, Joe. Of course, we talked a lot about, Lyric Rawls coming over from Kansas, one of those guys that really could be a instant plug and play type of starter, a guy who really could fill up a number of those stat categories. Antoine Belgrave Shorter comes over from Penn State. Sophomore Josiah McGrew at FIU, where he was an all-conference, all-freshman performer as well. Another one of those guys who just to name the stat category, he filled it up quite nicely. And then a pair of true freshmen through the signing class, Davis Kinney from Texas, and a local guy, Zeth Thus.
Yeah, and obviously replaces some high-end guys. Ghost Browser, Xavier Alford, even of course Alford missed the overwhelming majority of the season. Still very big shoes to fill. I think the pressure is going to be on some of the incumbents, like a guy like Montana Warren, to really keep the spot. Really like what Boogie brings to the equation when he's healthy. That's something that I think is real valuable in that starting lineup. But you're bringing in a guy like Lyric Rawls. You see his film and his numbers. That just does not strike you as the kind of player that's coming here to sit. I just really like what I read about Josiah McGrew. Like, just read all the numbers, and for his youth, it just strikes me as someone that, man, you get him in the right setting, and that can really take off. So that could be a competitor there. Belgrave Shorter, someone, if you're making your way to Penn State, yeah, you know how to play football. So again, it's going to be kind of a war between some of the incumbents and some of the newcomers. That nickel position is something that is such a subtly important part of this defense and this team as a whole. And when it's played well versus when it's played less than well, can be pretty noticeable. So fitting that spot's going to be important. So, again, kind of like we're talking all across the secondary, really is just going to be this influx of newcomers, a small few returners that can lay claim to some top flight depth chart positions, but not without a lot of work and competition.
And rounding out the team, let's talk some specialists. Of course, Canyon Floyd is returning as one of the punters. He unfortunately battled injury throughout most of the 2025 season. He had some flashes where you saw the fully healthy Floyd really do his thing. I believe he was the Week 1 Big 12 Special Teams Player of the Week, but he'll be joined by Nick McClarty, the Australian coming over from Ohio State, a very large 6'7", 250-pounder. But we'll see if his production can match his stature. And then a couple of other specialists that looks like the place kicker for 2025 or 2026, excuse me. And that's some big shoes to fill with what Jesus Gomez did a season ago. Carson Smith coming over from Austin P, where he was an FCS All-American. And long snapper will be Grayson Curtis coming over from New Mexico State.
I'm going to choose to be, mildly optimistic in the sense of just not being paranoid that this is going to be a massive, massive liability. Floyd is someone that showed flashes last year. I truly feel like if he would have been healthy the entire season, that people would be just, they'd be adequately pleased with the punter. Again, I feel bad saying the kind of things that I say sometimes about it, but like Matt McKenzie, I could say more. It was just very bad, and it obviously put a huge stain on the punting as a whole. Now then, a place kicker, Carson Smith is someone who had a really good year last year, and he was like an FCS All-American. I know that there are folks that might look at the fact that he didn't really do much in his kicking career at the college level prior to that season, or maybe some issues allegedly with like the range that he has. All in all, he's a good kicker, and he's proven it at the college level. And when there was that one kicker that ASU was after that I believe, returned to UCLA, for this to be like a plan B in that situation, I think is very good, especially for ASU where, I know that everybody wants the special teams to improve night and day. And I echo that, but to the same extent, if you have struggling special teams, sometimes that can be a struggle to appeal to people to come your way. You know what I'm saying? So, I like the pickup, and we'll see where that takes things. Now, obviously, special teams as a whole is just going to be a series of units that are going to be very, very closely monitored, and that's going to be long snapping. That's going to be protection. That's going to be coverage on kicks and punts. That's going to be return. It's going to be quite literally every facet of special teams, because when any special team trots out on the field as it is right now, a lot of Sentinel fans just collectively hold their breath, no matter what it is, whether they're kicking off, receiving a kickoff, punting, kicking, whatever it may be, extra points, whatever it may be. So there's going to be some trepidation. This is something where there's going to have to be some proof in the pudding. And like the first time a field goal is missed, unless it's from like 60 plus, there could be some freak out. But again, I think that they made enough strides. I'm curious how punter will shake out, because like I said, I'm fine enough with Canyon Floyd. McClarty is just interesting because yes, he was at Ohio State. Yes, he's this huge dude. Yes, we see stuff on social media about him kicking the tar out of the ball. Just the opportunities haven't really been there at the college level, so we just don't know a great deal about what he can do in game situations. And is this someone that is being brought here to overtake the top position, or is ASU kind of running with a annual deal of just kind of having multiple punters that you really intend to possibly use? So we'll see how that part shakes out. But again, I think I don't know that they made miles of progress, but I think that they might have made feet of progress.
Good,
No
good.
pun intended, I guess. Yeah.
I was hoping the pun was intended.
There you go.
All right. So that's a look at where ASU and their roster stands after the portal entry window has closed. Mentioned still a couple of spots for some wiggle room in that the traditional February signing period. But of course, spring ball will be opening up if they hold their normal calendar, kind of that mid-March area. So that's when a lot of these new faces we'll get a first look at and actually start to see some of that. So we'll dive much more into that and the analysis and once we get there. But before we close out, Joe, what's one position group? I don't want to, step on our annual position confidence rankings show. That's one of our more popular. But as of right now, because especially with so many new faces, what's one group you feel the best about right now?
It would be. It's weird. That's tough because there are a lot that have depth, but I can't figure it out. Like I want to go running back, want to go receiver, want to go linebacker. You know what? I'm just gonna cut the losses, and in this case, the tiebreaker is going to be Sean Aguano. So I will go with running back, even though I'm just really intrigued by how that's going to shake out. Wide receiver, I think they made tremendous strides. Linebacker, just as a group that's been strong lately, so you really trust the coaching and the development and the additions. I like I said, above and beyond. But if I'll say one, I'll go with the Aguano factor and the thought that maybe they can strike gold again from the FCS level. Maybe not the scat level, but enough to where it's a really good pickup. So I'll say I'm happy with running back.
I'm gonna go with linebacker. I think they were number one on my preseason confidence list as well. But I'm a big fan of what AJ Cooper does. But I think when you bring back a guy that with a tremendous upside with Martell Hughes, who was pressing a bigger role and responded really well, was able to learn behind Crook and Keyshawn Elliott for the last couple of years. We've seen what Zaire Fiancé was able to do, but man, you bring a piece like Owen Long into that mix. I'm really excited to see what they do. And so you have that mix of familiarity with the system, the high upside players there. So I really like the linebacker spot right now. But again, we'll see how it all plays out. And on the flip side, Joe, what's one that you perhaps maybe have the most questions about pre-spring?
I'll say like edge specifically, because at least on the interior you bring guys back that CJ Fight helps a great deal. Lona Wong Swanson have been great reserve guys. Can they step into starting roles? So that's less of a concern. I'm happy with the transfer additions that were made, but with the caveat, like I mentioned earlier, that in order for them to really be truly worthwhile as starting defensive ends, if we're assuming that they're going to be that, they are going to have to improve on their career numbers. And for guys that are 3, 4, or maybe even more years deep into college, sometimes that can be a big ask, sometimes not. There are a lot of guys that just the guy that just won the national championship and the Heisman Trophy is someone that really capitalized on a great senior year. So those things can happen. So I would say that I do have some concerns on the offensive line, but right now the edge positions, especially because ASU got quite a bit better at rushing the quarterback. Statistically, like rankings wise, that was something that they did a real solid job of in 2025. So you don't want to see them take a step back with that. So that's going to be that one for me.
I'm going to go with the O-line, which I think was near the bottom of the list heading into the year. And I don't think like this is the least talented group on the roster by a long shot. I'm in fact really intrigued by so many of these guys, but I think this is going to be a group that's probably going to lean a lot on maybe some of the junior college guys and some of the guys who just haven't done it. You mentioned like the week 1 starters from a season ago, all gone. And so even though you have some younger guys that were pressed into starting duty last year, and I think in a lot of cases performed admirably, just so many questions and how these pieces fit and where. I think there's a lot of guys that have some of that versatility, but maybe not. And even though the junior college guys are more physically developed and have college football experience, some respond pretty plug and play, others not so much. So we'll see exactly how that shakes out. But I do like the pieces, but still have a lot of questions, especially in an area in which chemistry is just such a crucial factor with so many new faces. But Joe, I think that's good look at this 2026 Sun Devil roster as it currently stands, and it's nearly completed form. But of course, the action doesn't stop in the offseason. Make sure you stay with the show on the social media side of things. Follow the show on Twitter at SOTD Podcast, on Instagram at Speak of the Devils. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Facebook, and give me a follow on all things social media at bdenny29.
And you can follow me at Joe Healy42. And as always, huge shout out. We encourage you to support our awesome sponsors if you don't already. And those folks, of course, are Burrito Express, Cactus Sports, DevilsDigest.com, Jones Auto Group, Nice Pest Company, Sun Devil Family Charities, and More Lending, LLC branch NMLS number 2732146, and PJ Saturno, NMLS number 257912.
Once you're done supporting all of our amazing sponsors, drop a 5-star review for us on the podcast platform of your choice. Tell a friend, and Joe and I will be back next week as we maybe take a deep dive into what the hell is going on in the current state of NIL.